Okay, so going live. And greetings in the
Okay,
love and
John.
light of the One Infinite Creator. I'm Andres Vorgan, and I'm here with Simon Michaux, John Peach, Ivor Lothing, Leon Meaden Dune, and Stephen St. Angelo will be joining us in about 20 minutes. And we're going to start our talk about diesel, and then we're going to move on to whatever peak oil related things. So, John, you had a graphic for us. Did you want to bring that up, or I have a copy of it
Sure.
as well? Okay.
Let's see.
So I can share it for you if you need.
Sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Allow. Okay. You guys see it there?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. See it.
Great.
Okay. So
Mhm.
I just got this data yesterday. It's from Jody, the Joint Organization Database Initiative that tracks oil use, and the joint organization is IEA, OPEC, some UN organization, and a few others. And so I tried to find diesel information. And reading this morning, it looks like I should have labeled this world diesel / gas demand. Gas to them is a later fraction of diesel. So it's not gasoline, it's not natural gas. This is really another component of diesel. But the takeaway here is that beginning around 2018, 2019, there was a fairly substantial collapse in demand, and it only just barely is coming back. Obviously some of this is COVID related, and it could be that China hasn't had the demand that they used to have, but I guess going to open it up to anybody who thinks they might have a good idea as to why this is happening.
So, just to clarify, demand really means consumption, right?
Right.
Yeah. Because it doesn't mean that they're just asking for it. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Did anyone else want to chip in? I know Ivor, you had some things on diesel.
Yeah, I have an idea.
Mhm.
I saw a graph recently that showed how little industrial output the UK was using and how little carbon. I mean, there was just an article on peak oil on the peak oil Facebook site about how little that they're actually using and how it's sort of fallen off a cliff, especially lately with the UK. And he said that it's very similar to the rest of Europe because Europe isn't really using. They're just not doing as much as they did before.
Right.
I mean, their industrial output has fallen like kind of off a cliff, which is really kind of scary. So that's a big chunk of the developed world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's all I think.
Right.
Yeah. So it could be Europe has not recovered. China seems to be just barely coming back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows? And I mean, obviously the big question is supply there that can handle this demand.
Yeah.
Could they possibly play a game where they only give the amount that the world actually uses, and turn the rest into, I don't know, shopping fuel, as they say, right?
Well, yeah, but this is really diesel consumption, I think.
Yeah.
So,
mm-hmm. Diesel consumption.
I don't see that it can. I mean, that's quite a drop there.
Yeah. And
lower than COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the COVID drop, but it didn't really rebound as much as the other ones. And I know, John, you were saying that the diesel portion of conventional oil is only 10%, right? 12 liters, and it's a 120-liter barrel?
No,
Oh,
it's
okay.
12 gallons out of 42-gallon barrel. I was doing it in gallons, and so it's about 28% of
28%. Oh, okay.
the total. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do we know what the fraction is for shale?
No, and that's a good question too, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a lighter oil that we get from shale.
Right.
And, and so this is fairly consistent with the 100 megabarrels a day consumption that you'd expect to get 25 to 30 barrels, million barrels per day of diesel consumption.
Mm-hmm.
Just roughly if that fraction of 12 gallons per barrel of oil is produced, or of diesel is produced per barrel of oil.
Yeah. Simon, did you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I remember Steve and Angelo put out a couple of graphs. This would have been, 7 or 8 years ago, that he showed that bunker fuel oil that goes into maritime shipping was peaked somewhere around 2007 and has been falling like a rock since. And diesel also had actually peaked a couple of years ago and was falling. And what struck me at the time was, what I thought was happening at the time was we'd actually sort of reached the point where the physical economy, where we're actually sort of doing physical things, had actually stopped. Not stopped, but peaked and declined. But we're doing more service-based things. So instead of heavy industrial economic stuff happening, it was more commercial and retail. And so gasoline kept going up, but all diesel, which is trucks and shipping and all the transport of actual goods, the real work, that was declining. And I remember thinking at the time that society had changed gears, but we had actually camouflaged that fact by moving to a slightly different fuel to do different actions. So this thing that we're seeing a couple of years ago of the graph that you had up where diesel has actually been declining. Okay, that you got the COVID. I had a chart that actually showed that the price kept bouncing up and down. It was like in a funnel that was narrowing, and we were about to find out what would happen when supply and demand separated. Then COVID happened, so it was like the perfect point for camouflage.
Yeah.
And so this is another chart that shows, well, you can actually see the decline happening 2 years before COVID.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't appear that this was entirely a COVID-related thing.
This is 2020. Mm-hmm. The big drop.
I saw something similar.
Mm-hmm. So because isn't this because conventional and condensates peaked production in 2018 and then 2019 was less?
That may be the case, but there's a reason for that. There's everything's connected to everything else, right? Like so, demand and consumption of fuel just doesn't happen. It's done for a reason. And when it drops off, and so the system was actually having real economic, almost like a form of stagflation, but in a physical world context. That seemed to happen about 12, 18 months before COVID hit. And it was decreasing ever so slightly, but consistently. We're not talking about like 1 or 2 weeks of volatility, but that's like 3 or 4 quarters in a row. Mm-hmm. So it actually means something. Society runs on cheap energy, right? And when the link between energy, oil, and the dollar, the US dollar, was put under the spotlight in 2008, since then the world's been on life support. And it's been, since then, one damn thing after another. And I think maybe what this graph is showing is a couple of years ago, we passed the point of can't hiding it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, too, that, you see the decline in 2008, which
Over here.
that's a well marked point there. But the decline in 2019 was even bigger than that.
Yeah.
And the 2020, obviously that was the COVID shutdown, but COVID was not. I mean, we call it COVID-19 because it kind of started then, but it didn't really affect anything in 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The main mandates and things began in 2020. That prevented people from going out. And another thing related to this and the energy wars was Art Berman had posted. I think they said that because they've destroyed 13 refineries, Ukraine has destroyed 13 refineries in Russia. They were down 600 barrels or 600 barrels per day, or how many? I'm not sure.
600,000.
600,000. That's what it was. 600,000 barrels per day. And then we were. I ran the numbers, and it was about 3 million barrels a day is how much refined product that Russia puts on the market. And so that's going to decline by, I guess, at least 600,000 barrels or something.
Who does that hurt, though? Who does that really hurt?
Mostly Europe or people that use it.
Because Russia's on a wartime footing, and it's now in a struggle for its own survival, and it can actually sort of take hits and casualties. Like, it's been sanctioned for years now in one form or another, and so if we start blowing up refineries, I saw in a Foresight Friday meeting the other day, in Germany, 2/3 of all industrial businesses have either left or have partially relocated, since the gas supply problem. Where have they gone? United States!
Oh, the U.S. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Some have gone to China, but thanks, guys.
Yeah. It's amazing how many things they've done have kind of backfired. And also another thing I was mentioning about this is that this will actually lower their it could anyways lower their production at least somewhat, and then the amount of oil reserves that Russia has will continue for longer. Like, they already have, like, based on their domestic consumption and their reserves, they have enough for 34 years, whereas Europe has enough for 1 to 2 years, and America has enough for 6.
So I think the whole oil thing in the tight oil sector in America, they fundamentally got that wrong. I'd be interested to hear what Steve thinks of this, but what I think they should have done, instead of trying to sell cheap oil to the rest of the world, right, so they can maintain their empire, what the Americans should have done is kept the oil for themselves, not exported any of it, and guaranteed the primacy of the American system for the next century by keeping that oil for themselves.
And that's basically what they're forcing Russia to do by refusing to take their oil and blowing up the refineries. Is that they're like, okay, no, Russia, you keep your oil so that, we're going to close down our industries and not be able to do anything, and you'll just keep getting stronger. So, I mean, that seems to be the effect that it's having anyways.
There is another possibility, but I won't even say it.
Oh, well, what is that? Ivor, you might as well know that.
Well, okay, like us with Iraq, the United States with Iraq. I mean, Iraq was a voting seat on OPEC, and also it was almost like the world kind of held on to Iraq as a big bunch of oil that sat there. And Iraq was not totally exploited at the beginning of the Iraq War. And remember, I always say all wars are for God, gold, oil, or drugs.
Yeah.
And for oil, and it might have been to get a voting seat on OPEC. The fact that Saddam Hussein wanted to trade oil in euros, and also the fact that That's a big pot of oil. So you kind of, you've gone through everything else. So then you decide, okay, let's break this big, egg up and dump it into the world oil market.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of there's something to what you say there, Ivor. I agree with that. It's just, but I just see them making some dumbass decisions that made sense in the short term, but the long game they've made a complete mess of.
Well, all empires will make the same exact mistakes. It just seems like we're in the same playbook. Okay, we got Afghanistan, we got to some extent the Middle East. Everybody's been playing in there. Everybody plays in the same places all the way back to like Alexander the Great, right? But anyway, what I'm saying is, what's the next one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's hit Russia. Everybody always hits Russia at the end of their empire.
They have the largest.
Always looks that badly.
What could possibly go wrong?
Right. But look, talk to. There's a famous graph from the 1800s of the troops that Napoleon sent into Russia. It's a super famous graph. It's like from way back, right? Anyway, it shows this enormous wide line going into Russia, and it goes all the way to Moscow. And then, of course, the graph there it is. It shows
which one?
People. That it's one of these ones with the brown. That's the original one right there. Notice the line going into Russia, and then the line coming out. See that little line?
Here, I'm going to try to get it.
That's it. Bigger. That's it. See how there's this big giant line coming out of Paris. Mm-hmm. And then it gets all the way to Moscow, and then there's still sort of a fat line, but by the time it gets back to Paris again, it's a tiny little thin line.
I'll try to get a bigger version of it.
Yeah, General Winter knocked them off,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I am just a person who lives in the United States, but what I'm saying is,
Smolensk. There we go. Okay.
Like the same playbook every time. The brown line is the one going in.
Oh, I see. Okay, by the time they get to Moscow. Oh, I see. This is where they started.
Yeah, they start.
Kono.
They start. I guess this must be the the Vienna River, right? So that must be sort of the edge of Eastern Europe, right there. Kauno. Anyway, that's where they entered Russia. And see how they're going along. They're going along. The numbers. See the numbers start to dwindle. 30,000, 170,000. They get to Russia and they're like 145,000.
Smolensk. Yeah, that sounds Russian.
And then they're coming out. You'll see it'll go all the way to Moscow.
Yeah, and it's 100,000. Yeah,
100,000 leave Moscow.
Oh, and this is them coming back. Oh my gosh.
General Winter, and notice how they get down.
Wow, 24,000, 20,000, 50,000.
Maybe they got a few back here.
Wow, 8,000, 4,000 made it back. Wow.
4,000 made it just to the...
And they started with 400,000.
More,
422,000, and they ended with 4,000. Wow.
So 1%.
1% of people survived. Like that is so bad.
A few came in here, maybe 10,000 by the time they get done, but how many of them made it back to, that's back to their lines,
Yeah. Oh, Steve has joined us. Hey, Steve.
Andrew, hi. I'm sorry, a little late. Glad to be here. It's always great to learn different things, so thanks for allowing me to join.
G'day, Steve. Nice to meet you, mate.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah. I've been a fan for years.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people are going to be blindsided by how things unfold, especially after 2025. So
yeah,
it's and I've been following a lot of Simon. I've been following his work, and there's been a lot of warning signs. Unfortunately, the market is ignoring those signs.
The market seems to be driven by ideology at the moment. Well, large portions of it.
Yes.
Or large portions of the market think they've got a cunning plan that seems to exclude everyone else. So it's yeah. So
and the irony of that is people say, well, the elite will take over. Well, you need all those billions of people working, a lot of them working to make the semiconductors and the massive supply chain to have high tech. And so if a lot of the disruption happens in the market with a lot of the working people, then they're not going to get that high tech. And so it's a kind of an irony that and if you go back to the late Bronze Age, I mentioned this in that last conversation I had, is that the elite were wiped out during the late Bronze Age. And so this idea that the elite are just going to take over everything on pennies on the dollar, it just doesn't cut butter. And a lot of people believe that.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I'm of the opinion the current batch of, let's call them the elite, they're not that smart. They're intellectually very smart, but they seem to have misunderstood what a human being is, because they themselves don't seem to have empathy. So a lot of their science, where they've studied us and study us in the positions of stress, like back in the 50s, there's a lot of studies that were sort of done. They don't seem to understand that we humans are evolving. And as you were saying, their plans, I think, will miscarry. They'll roll out, but they'll miscarry.
Well, that is what...
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of intelligence, but not much wisdom. And so I think that's the biggest difference. There's not much wisdom there. The intelligence is there in many different, even there's a lot of intelligence in engineering of the green energy, but there's no wisdom there.
Nope. And in fact, I'm still being subject to that lack of wisdom. There's a group that's actually trying to cancel me. That's actually seems to be attached. I was on a podcast. This will make you laugh, Steve. I was on a podcast last week, and they were saying this was the TBLI group, and they were actually said that they were approached by lots and lots of people trying to have me removed off the list when they were sort of put my name out there. So we're going to interview this guy, and his name's Robert. And Robert said he hadn't seen anything like this, so he actually tried to check out who's involved, like who was this, and every single one of them are attached to the banking sector, finance sector of the green transition. And I have to remember I've upset a multi-trillion-dollar industry with my work, right? And so, but anyway, I've never seen anything quite as blatant as that yet. And my work's about to come out, and it's in the final stages of peer review after 2 years. And when it comes out, all the monkeys on Twitter can get a life.
I look forward to when that comes out and reading it, because I think the issue is either the individual or these people in charge. It's like you're the red warning light, and so what they want to do is they want to disconnect that red warning light that's in your car. The problem's still there, but if you disconnect the red warning light, then it doesn't look like it's still there. And so this is kind of the childish, immature behavior. And, you can tell individuals as they get older, people are supposed to mature and get more wisdom as they get older. But when you come across a lot of the elite with money, they're very immature people. They haven't really matured. Wisdom, they haven't matured. And so it's a matter of compounding, let's say, wealth or whatever that is, or control. And so, it's a very interesting dynamic. But whatever they do, as you know, Simon, this is not something that can be postponed indefinitely. I think we're in a plateau we could be in a plateau for 5 years, I think, especially with a recession. But this is not something that we're not going to have another 15 years like we had since the pandemic, since the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah, I can see we're going to have to work harder and harder. We've got a red queen problem. We'll have to work harder and harder. Yes. Yeah, to stand still, we've just got to work harder and harder and keep up appearances.
Yeah,
it's
Yeah, and if you the interesting thing I'm seeing, especially in the United States, is the crude oil inventories. Well, I know they're at the minimum level on land in the world, but the crude oil inventories in the United States are about in the medium range. The gasoline is in the medium range. The jet fuel is above the median range. It's the diesel that's at the low range, below the low range. And so I think what's going to happen, and you probably know this, as that conventional continues to decline, even though we bring on lots more NGLs, that's not going to help the global supply chain. And so I think we're going to notice this more in the next several years as diesel becomes more problematic to provide.
So John's got there's a chart on the screen at the moment. This is something John put together, John Peach, with some recent data. But I remembered you put similar charts together a couple of years ago about bunker fuel and diesel that actually declined a couple of years ago. And I remember thinking at the time that society was changing gears in what it was doing. It was moving away from physical industrial actions and more to service-based actions that tend to use vehicles and transportation associated with gasoline. We're a more service-based economy now, hoping that things will get better later. So,
and I don't know if you noticed, I've been looking at China. China consumes a lot of diesel, and so what they did is they ramped up the EVs. They're the largest suppliers of a lot of the green energy stuff, whatever it is, wind, solar, and EVs and batteries. So they transitioned a lot of their public transportation to electric buses. So that took away a nice percentage of diesel consumption that was being consumed by moving around these millions of Chinese who are working, for bare minimum wages to survive in these big cities. And so now the problems that they're having with these EV buses and the batteries are not as lasting as long. So it's starting to come back to haunt them. And I think as time goes by, there's going to be a lot more problems that aren't really, they don't really see them yet, but they're starting to come in with all this very advanced technology. It's going to break down more than what they realize. That's what I'm seeing, especially out of China.
So it's So your work's been excellent over the years. At the moment, I'm writing a report for Hawaii. Like, what would Hawaii have to do to phase out fossil fuel? And
I live here, so I know.
Yeah, and so it's a 500-page monster at the moment, and there's 8 scenarios. And like I map out, for example, the do nothing scenario, which is it all goes belly up. Then there is the green transition scenario, and then I did the Club of Rome degrowth. If you were to shrink to say 31% of the size, what would happen? And then there is if you were to sort of, all right, none of this is going to work. What if we did some really weird stuff? Like the unconventional. I call it the purple transition. Anyway, the reason I say all this is along the way, I've decided to put in an appendice around Easter Island. And a lot of what we're describing, and if I may share my screen, I've actually sort of got the, would I be able to share?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Window. Here we go. So this is actually, you should be able to see that. So this is actually an appendice I'm putting together. There's a lot of disagreement about what happened on Easter Island. So I went through all the references and I've assembled a map of what everyone says, and there's a rough consensus. So we've got tree cover on the island, human population, and the raising of statues. And I've assembled these 7 references. The 6 references and 5 of them are here. They started deforesting. They didn't realize what they were doing. Population went up. They started raising statues at the same time. They ran out of wood. They couldn't do any statues anymore, religious. Population peaked, and they thought, hey, let's give war a chance. And they turned on each other, and everything went belly up. But it was actually the resources. It was the trees that allowed them to build canoes. And so this is actually a systems study that's actually been done by a colleague of mine called Harold Sverdrup. And he did a series of systems, and he actually accurately predicted what actually happened. And it was actually the trees. Trees to build canoes. And so what you're describing, Steve, what you've got a very, very big idea by the edge. Right, and because you're dealing with data, and you always have dealt with data, you've actually got the ability to describe what's happening and predict a series of scenarios going forward. Because no one else has the data, they're relying on arm waving. All right, so what you're describing is not exactly the same as Easter Island, but there are learnings from Easter Island. They were so consumed with resources, consuming resources that had nothing to do with their actual survival.
Right.
But they didn't realize they were deteriorating that resource stock. And then when they passed a tipping point without realizing it, they hadn't developed an alternative system that depended on different resources. And they just didn't realize what was happening to them, and then they were left with some very human behavior. And their duck was cooked. And I really feel there's something in us for all of us, but we can't see what oil does for us.
No.
And within oil, we can't see what diesel does for us versus gasoline. And by the time it passes and we started to take this seriously, we'll think, oh, yeah. So by the time we actually start thinking clearly and properly, we will have already passed a tipping point. And then we're dealing with consequence and human behavior and dumbass decisions by people who meant well.
Yeah, and I think this has been a scenario that humans have played over and over.
Yeah.
And there's some good documented ones, like, Easter Island's a good one. The Roman Empire is a good one, the late Bronze Ages. Now, the Mayan Empire was another one. Yeah. The only difference is the way the climate and the system was developed. You found out about the Mayans by uncovering the forest.
Yeah.
The problem in the Mediterranean and North Africa and the Middle East is that it was the way that the system is set up, that it just got drier and drier as the human deforestation. So and as I mentioned in the last talk, I came across this woman, and she was studying olive orchards. And that's what her and her husband in France have an olive orchard. And so she wanted to learn about olive orchards. So she went all over the world traveling, and she found the largest ancient Roman olive oil press in mid Algeria, which is a desert now. Mm. But it wasn't a desert. It would look somewhat like Western United States back in the 1800s. That's kind of what it probably looked like. The western part, the grass, the Sahara. But the savannah. But then in just a relatively short period of time, it turned into a desert. And so it's not only what humans have done into their resources. You could get, like in South America, you could get a regeneration of the forests, but in other parts of the world, you don't get the regeneration. And so then what happens without oil, it becomes increasingly poverty. That's why you've got a lot of immigrants moving out of North Africa, moving into Europe, because it continues to turn into more of a desert. So there's a lot of different scenarios, but when you remove oil, or oil becomes more problematic, I don't think people realize what that starts to look like. But I do think there's going to be some issues. They're going to try to do more efficiencies, because I really think if we're smart, we're going to start saying, listen, we're going to have to cut down on doing luxury traveling. If we're smart, we may not be smart, but if we're smart, we're going to have to try to figure out how to use better what we have. But I don't have the answers. The answers on the flip side of this peak oil curve, there's no good answers. There's just less horrible scenarios.
So I agree with all that. But instead of actually trying to fix it for 8 billion people, because how many people do you actually come across won't have a bar of these ideas, and they're actually even take the time to be rude to you? And so how do you think they're going to go with a problem they don't look at? And so what I do is round up like-minded people and work with them. And for the last 3 years in particular, because I've been presenting my work to fairly senior people all over the world now, and every politician I've come across, and even every billionaire I've come across, they all say that they feel that they're relatively helpless because the momentum of the system doesn't allow them to act with anything different to their normal everyday formula. And I come to the conclusion there's two kinds of people that will help us out of this. One is the badly behaved scientist that's protected by tenure somehow. Mm-hmm. And the other one's the enlightened James Bond villain.
they all say that they feel that they're
So,
relatively helpless.
one of the two. And
Right.
but
Or both.
or both. In fact, I was one. Could I be another? I just need a couple of $1 billion. But one of there was actually a pattern of what needs to happen here. That there are plenty of ideas out there, but they're not allowed traction. The incumbent school of thought won't allow them out. So on one hand, we need society to understand what the hell's happening to us. There's this widespread ignorance. That we need to get educated in what we are faced and what are the moving parts of that. But then the second part of the equation is we need to turn some of those ideas into an engineering reality. Someone's got to go out and do some of these things. It's going to happen on a small scale, and that's just a reality.
Yes.
And so I've got this idea of actually setting up an innovation hub where you have innovation ideas. Okay, that's great, but you also have a string of pilot scale engineering sites that actually do engineering things and actually demonstrate stuff, and people can say that works. Is it now viable? And so I'm starting to sort of think in those terms, and the more I think on this, the more I'm just going to leave behind anyone in charge at the moment. I'm just going to disappear over the horizon and come back in 10 years with a different system. Because the existing system won't allow the kind of problem solving that is necessary. And as you sort of say, what you end up with is a calamity, a genuinely difficult series of things to look at. And all they seem to have got is, what do you mean we can't have the oil? So that seems to be the length and breadth of it. But,
Yeah.
so,
And then unfortunately, I guess you all heard of Doomberg. He's a pretty big popular name. Hides behind the green chicken. I actually know who it is. It's two individuals. It's a middle-aged gentleman, a guy and a woman, and for some reason now he thinks peak cheap oil is no longer the case, and so that tends to give more fuel to the financial markets.
yeah,
because
it does.
the only reason why you go into finance is you think we live on an infinite growth on a finite planet, and so it's amazing that you have to compete with that. So it's unfortunate, but you're kind of fighting this kind of message out there that, I hate to say this, I'm going to get a shirt, can't fix stupid, because we can fix ignorance. I'm very ignorant of many things, but if you kind of pick it up, have an open mind, you can learn things. It is amazing how stupidity is just prevalent. Go ahead.
Can I say something? The Mayans, toward the end of their empire, they became convinced as it got drier that the only way to fix it was to make more lime to put onto the temples. So they cut down the rest of the forest so that they could make more of this white stuff and put it on the temples to implore the gods to send more rain and stuff. And so I don't think it's human nature. I think human nature is just like the Easter Island. We laugh about it now, but I'm sure it was very serious. They were like, we have a plan to get more lime to put on the temples, and that's going to work. The gods will send us more rain, and it obviously didn't work out so great. And then the elites would go from one little civilization that crashed to another one, to another one, to another one. They'd run to see if they could get their cousins to help them out. So I don't know.
And,
the way it worked.
Unfortunately, we have to do, human species has to do something or try to do something.
Yes.
Gosh, there's so many other factors that are, let's say we just forget energy or how to run things. You've got problems with trying to produce all this food, and I don't think people realize that 50% of the seafood in the world is farm raised. And I tell people, if you really want to poison yourself, then eat farm-raised salmon, especially Norwegian farm-raised salmon, because the pellets that they feed the salmon come from this Baltic area. They dredge these eels that are toxic, and they make the pellets and they feed them to the salmon. And then what these salmon fisheries are doing, or these farm-raised salmon, they're totally polluting these Norwegian areas, these waterways. It's simply amazing the stupidity being done. And there's been some very smart people doing YouTube videos on this. And it's just like what happened to you, Simon. They get rid of this guy, they pull him away. And so a lot of I'm not saying all seafood that's raised farm is not fit to eat, but a lot of it is. And so the world is eating, a lot of people are dependent on that 50% of seafood that is farm raised. That isn't sustainable with a lot of energy. So you look around, there seems to be a lot more problems than there's available solutions.
Well, so would you? This is a theory. Like there was a time a couple of years ago when I came to Europe that I believe that there was a sensible plan on the ground, and we were trying to do the best that we were trying to do. But the more I looked, the more I was convinced that the green transition is just a PR campaign to convince humanity there is a plan. Right? It's all the arm waving. They never actually got to the point of doing, say, a scoping study, let alone a pre-feas. And it feels like, even at this late stage, that humanity has been collectively walked to the edge of the pier, and then the veil's going to lift. And we're right at the edge of the pier now, so right, reality's here. And they'll say something like, yeah, there is no plan. Sorry about that. That was Trevor who did those calculations. Trevor's not with us anymore. Sucks to be you. Now we're going to have to make some hard decisions. Sorry. And it's the more I look, the more I've convinced that is actually the case.
That reminds me of when I don't remember what Dmitry Medvedev was. So someone met with Obama, and it was the spring thing was happening in Arab Springs, and they were wondering. They were asking Obama, so if you do overthrow those governments with what are you going to do next? And Obama said, well, we don't plan that far ahead.
Well, you see, please finish, but I do agree with what you're saying, because I know people in the industry, some higher level people in the mining industry. The fascinating thing is the ones who get promoted to the top aren't qualified. And so what happens is the management that's running the mining industry or the mining company, instead of promoting someone who's going to make the mine company more efficient, they're actually promoting people who look more towards the short term. And so this is coming back to haunt them. And so they're merging into companies where it helps, let's say, the top company owners or the top management. But what happens is it's not beneficial either for the shareholder, for the mining company itself, or for the system. And so I think this is kind of the MO for green energy. I don't think people said, we're going to start this and bamboozle the world. I think just the way businesses run, hey, Warren Buffett, he does a lot of wind because of the tax write-offs. And so to me, it seems like it was a short-term benefit to do this. And it just kept going. Just like with the Mayans adding more, using more lime to it. I actually don't think these people are doing it because they know it's screwing up. I think they're just looking at a focused short-term goal. This is better right now. And so all that comes back to haunt you when it starts, because I think these wind turbines are going to really start to malfunction in the next 5 to 10 years. And they are already. They're making them bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're getting a lot more problems with them. And so we're not going to have you see, we had the energy growth, the fossil fuel energy growth to make the wind turbines. You start peaking and declining, then you don't have that you can't continue to replace that stuff. And so I think this is another one of those short-term problems.
And green energy sounds like such a good idea, to the general public. You're saying, oh, we're going to get rid of all these fossil fuels, we'll replace it with green energy, and then our carbon problem goes away. And so I think that's a lot of the key as to why people are buying into this is because it just sounds so good, and you don't look hard enough at the physics of it, and you just think, okay, great, let's do it.
I can explain what happened to the mining industry. Like, why are we this way? See, my career in mining started, I graduated from undergrad in 1994. And at the time, the cutoff grade for copper was around 2 or 3%.
2 or 3%, yeah.
2 or 3%, right? And of course, now you know what it is. But the people at the time were bitching and moaning what was happening to them. Because back in the 70s, the mining industry had a culture of looking forward 25 to 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And they would actively spend money on things that would not come to fruition for several decades into the future, but they deadly serious invested in that. And that changed. And what was driving that change is it was a different era in mining. There was a time when a mining company owned and controlled the whole mine. But mines have had to grow in size, right? And now the enterprises are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, when you start a mine, shareholders put up about 30%. The rest comes from a banking hedge fund, right? So the banking hedge funds have quietly taken over control of the mining industry. What has happened is each mine has actually come in there bigger and bigger and bigger, but because they control the majority of the capital behind, the startup, the focus over time has actually shifted from a 25 to 30 year thing into the future, just as resource stewardship, to we don't care how you do it, we want a better bottom line. And so they went from a 30-year time frame to, well, the next 2 quarters is and see, the people who controlled mining didn't really understand mining, they just wanted the money. And they're very hard-nosed about it. And it's, well, if you don't get with the program, you can get another job. And so over time, like we're talking about several decades, the culture in the mining was just weeded out. So any long-term thinking has been sweated out, and now it's all very short-term. But not only short-term, it's short-term bottom line. And anything like resource stewardship is gone. And yeah, and so this is different eras of mining, and the next era of mining is the merging of the corporation and the nation state. Because the government, when you start a mine now, you've got to spend about, say, it's 4 or 5 billion US to build a copper mine. It's something like that. But then you've got to convince the local government to put in infrastructure and get them to pay for it. Roads, rails, ports, power stations. And so the local government is actually a partner, a silent partner, but a partner to that mine. So the next era of mining is when governments and private sector will collaborate, because the capex is now so large and the NPV tool has only got a window of 7 or 8 years long to get your payback. And so it takes longer than that to commission these mines. And so they're now starting to sort of think in terms of back to long-term thinking, but long-term thinking in terms of we own this, we control this, you're irrelevant. So we've gone from long-term thinking resource stewardship into short-term money gain to long-term strategic control. We've already got the money, and it's this weird sort of dynamic that I was collecting information to show that the mining industry was it was heading for a train wreck, but it didn't seem to understand what was happening. Corporate leadership didn't seem to get it, and so they were just going to use the old classic, just fire everyone till it gets better. And that's why I actually left Australia and mining to come to Europe to learn industrial recycling, and then was disappointed.
Well, you see, you brought up an excellent point that I've been trying to clarify, because a lot of people now, the people who tend to analyze the gold mining industry, the new thing now is to come out and basically criticize the entire gold mining industry, except for a few companies, because they've just totally destroyed the gold industry as costs have exploded. But there's an insidious thing happening. You see, I figured out now a total cost of production, the gold miners, it's about 85, maybe even 90%. So if you're going to bring an ounce of gold to the market, And that really is the highest form of collateral. Now, a U.S. Treasury, you're going to pay it's going to cost anywhere between 85 to 90% to bring that gold to market. And most of the gold is consumed. Now, we can, regardless if it's a waste of energy to produce gold, I get that the U.S. Treasury can print 2.4 trillion and issue additional not recycle. You mature a Treasury, then you've got to reissue it, but brand new 2.4 trillion, and they don't have to manufacture that. There is a service cost that the authorized participants who sell these Treasury get, and then of course the U.S. government has to service that. But Janet Yellen let us know that they can print that amount of interest. So when you've got a gold mining industry, and that's not only gold, that's silver, that's copper, the physical part of the economy is competing with the central banks of the world that can provide what people think are assets, financial assets, what I call them liabilities masquerading as assets. They continue to absorb this finance. But this is also another part that's destroying the very physical mining industry. It's because the costs are going up. And I did a study. The costs, I said this, Newmont, they did a merger. Their costs in some of their gold mines in Canada, they're all in sustaining cost, which is in total cost, is like $1,700, $1,800, $1,900. And some were like 2,000. And when you go back before the pandemic shutdown, before all this printing started, they were 1,100, 1,200, maybe 1,300. So the really cheap mines that were 600, all in sustaining cost of 700 back then, are now 1,100, 1,200. The marginal ones have gone way up. And so now they're going to get rid of those 6 mines because the market thinks that Newmont dropped the ball. Well, it's not Newmont, it's Kinross, it's Anglo Gold, it's Goldfields. They all have dropped the ball. But how could they all drop the ball? They didn't drop the ball. They're competing with the financial central banks that can print assets at no cost.
Is that why stocks have been going down? Like the gold mining stocks have not been going up, even though the price of gold is going up.
Well, the reason why is the top 6 gold miners, their free cash flow per ounce was higher in 2019 at a $1,390 gold price. It's less last year per ounce with a $1,900 gold price. But that wasn't the gold mining industry. They didn't do that. You see, they could have been smarter. They could have done. Listen, we're not going to do these highly cost open pit mines or whatever. We'll just lower production. To hell with the demand. If there's going to be less production, and we're going to keep our costs low. But no, they tried to meet the demand and continue these less profitable mines. But then the central banks just went crazy in the last 4 years. So there's so many dynamics that are happening that are disrupting the physical system. And that's why I think I call the energy cliff, which is right now what we're in. We're in this kind of plateau. Yeah. It's going to be very volatile for prices up and down. And I think that just gets worse, and it's not good for producers. But I do think at some point in time, the central banks are going to get into trouble issuing this finance. And I don't know what that looks like, but I do think that's when the market starts to move back into physical assets, not because they want to, but because they're forced to. Because a lot of this other finance isn't going, the value of it is going to continue to decline. And so there's so many dynamics taking place. But yeah, and I'm not going to go on, but if we think what's happening with the gold miners and silver miners underperforming share prices due to the higher costs, the Bitcoin industry is times 2, times 3. If you look at what's happening with the Bitcoin mining industry, the capital destruction of a Bitcoin miner, 90% in 2 years.
What?
That's like buying a brand new car, and in 2 years you got to turn it in and buy a new one. Most of the depreciation on most equipment, a mining company, is straight line depreciation. So most Bitcoin miners last 5 years, 4 or 5 years. That's bad enough as it is. Can you imagine a gold mine lasting 4 or 5 years? They don't. They last 10, 15, 20, 30 years. the Bitcoin miner, most of the this is the depreciation curve. Most of the Bitcoin produced in that Bitcoin miner is by the second year. It's 90%. The rest of the 10% comes in the next 3 years. The amount of capital destruction that they have to do to get new Bitcoin miners, because the other ones are they're basically dying, and they've done share dilution. So the Bitcoin mining was done a lot in China. China realized it consumes a lot of energy, and they're going to have problems. So they start to get rid of the Bitcoin mine. It moved to the U.S., and we were stupid enough to allow it. And so now it's 2% of the estimates are up to 2% of total U.S. electricity consumption. And so to continue replacing Bitcoin miners, they basically destroyed the shareholder value, and that's going to continue. I think the Bitcoin mining industry, as it is, the way it is right now, is probably going to self-destruct within the next several years. Even if the price of Bitcoin goes up, which I don't know if it's going to go up to 200,000 or a million that they suggest, but what's happening, as Simon's talking about, the Red Queen syndrome from old-fashioned mining to what we're doing now, to going to Bitcoin, it's like slow, medium, super fast. And so the capital destruction in the Bitcoin mining industry is obnoxious. And so, and I try to warn people, and they think that, it's a fascinating dynamic that's happening right in front of our eyes.
Yeah, well, I said, don't be in the middle of a herd on top of a cliff when someone yells, "Yo, shit's on fire." There's a number of technical problems of why those mining costs are going up, and this is actually why I left the mining industry years ago. When you actually put the data together, but it's over a number of decades before you see it, but grade has been decreasing, but also the grind size of the minerals has been decreasing. But there was a time like when I started my career, wet behind the ears, 21 years old, thought I knew everything. Yeah, right. The closing size for a comminution circuit was about 150 micron. That is, you've got to crush and grind all the ore down to 150 micron. And that liberated enough of the target mineral that you could then extract it. We moved into a different kind of mineralogy where now our target size is down around 20 micron or 10 micron or smaller again. And in the year 2000, we invented fine grinding with the isomill. And you can actually see in the productivity index for Australia, there was a peak and decline since 2000. And over about the next 12 years, productivity dropped about 50%. That is, you had to do twice the amount of work for the same unit of metal pulled out of the ground. So not only is grade declining, but we're moving into disseminated rock that is finer, so we've got a grind finder. And there's an exponential relationship between grind size and energy. Right, so much more energy used. The rock is also harder, right? So more energy again. And when you go into the finer rocks, finer grain-sized rocks, it's really hard to actually recycle the water, and so water costs go up as well.
Because that water is like a paste.
Yeah, that's right. It just doesn't settle. In the settling ponds don't work so well. So you wind up in a you wind up with a situation of you have to shift a whole lot more dirt and you have to do more with it. So energy costs, you've got this massive amount of energy that goes up. Energy itself has been going up. So what you've got is a whole lot of things that are complicating the life of the average mining operation, and it's across the board, and it's been happening for the last couple of centuries. And they've been using economies of scale to sort of keep up with demand. But there comes a point when that's not going to work. Like you were saying, let's just get it to hell with demand. We're just going to scale back production and do a bit of resource stewardship. We're not far off that actually happening in multiple metals.
So I was wondering what's the grind size now? I got a graph of the different for people.
So when I started my career, 150 microns was about where we're at, and that's like human hair.
Mm-hmm.
Most gold mines that are coming online now are about to have a grind size of 20 micron.
Oh my God.
And
So a white
some of
blood
the
cell.
some of the gold mines I've worked on, like there's one in Papua New Guinea, that this massive underground block cave mine, in all the characterization, they'd only found 106 gold grains in their characterization, and they had an average size of 5 micron.
Wow.
Right. So and
That's
that block
a
cave went down to 3 kilometers
respiratory
deep.
droplet.
Yeah. And so you've got to grind the stuff really fine so it's liberated, and then you've got to apply either flotation or leaching or students with tweezers to actually sort of get whatever target metal you've actually got. I like to joke to my students with tweezers hung by the ankles over a conveyor belt is how we're going to separate they. So yeah, and so this is what's happening to the mining industry. There's a whole lot of physical and natural resource constraints, but the industry that's managing them and dictating terms is the finance industry that can just make shit up, and they don't care, and so mining's an increasingly stressful industry to be in when it should be an increasingly lucrative industry, but it's not.
Right. Well, Simon, I had an understanding of this, but I appreciate you sharing that because I didn't realize it was getting that low. But it makes sense. It really does start to make sense because, Fresnillo is one of the largest primary silver producers, and it's amazing just in the last year or two how their costs, and it's. I've been following. I mean, they started mining in Mexico in the 1500s, right, 1600s, and so they got a lot of the good quality, high grade ore hundreds of years ago, and now they're just continuing to get into the lower and lower grade stuff. But it's amazing how the largest primary silver producer in the world now, their total costs are over $20.
Yeah.
And so this is the fight I have with I'm having a battle with the mining industry because of their all-in sustaining costs. It works a little bit better with the gold mining industry, but it's a very lousy thing for the silver mining industry because they're deducting what they call their byproduct credits or revenue to get these very low costs, but the companies aren't making any money. And so it's kind of it's a very funny situation. As you said, the mining industry is trying to bamboozle or to obfuscate how much more expensive it is to produce these metals. So they come up with these metrics. It's a $10 cash cost to produce silver. Well, if you look at your free cash flow and your net income, you're not making any money. Who are you trying to fool? But this has been going on, and now I think shareholders are finally starting to hit them. But again, I don't blame them. I blame the mining industry for not being more transparent with shareholders, but that's their problem. The problem that they're facing, though, is how the central banks and the financial institutions have diluted the ability, because again, the data I have is last year the gold mining industry produced about 230 billion worth of gold. If you multiply how much was produced by 2,000 ounces by $2,000, just the U.S. Treasury producing 2.4 trillion of treasuries that were all absorbed by the market. This doesn't include the ECB and the Bank of Japan and CCP and all the other countries. The gold mining industry has to compete with that.
Yeah.
And so I think that, it's a double-edged sword. As you're talking about, the dynamics of mining is getting much more difficult and much more expensive. At the same time, what is controlling the markets, the central banks, are making it even worse. Because there was a reason that we had gold as money, and that was the foundation of the banking system, because you can only produce so much gold a year. So much gold, that's the real collateral. But now you've got all these other financial assets that are masquerading as collateral. And so this is the biggest problem the financial market is dealing with, is a shortage of collateral. And that is going to go into hyperdrive in the next several. And that's going to start really disintegrating a lot of this very highly leveraged finance.
Yeah. Those the number of look. I started my work in 2009. The most hostile audience I've ever presented when I stood up in front of a corporate mining audience, which is Research University of Queensland, and tried to present to them peak mining. And I told them about you're vulnerable to energy and fossil fuels, and that was my very first burning at the stake.
Let me ask you, did you have an idea when you started that it could be a reaction, or did this come out? Was this a revelation to you?
So, no, because actually, in fact, the report that's scrolling on the screen there, some of those figures, Steve, is actually your work. I've actually referenced you several times in there. That's Mining's and Minerals to the Limits to Growth. Back in the day, I was looking at the energy of comminution, of grinding, and I knew how the industry was at the time, but I was also researching peak oil, and I was on the oil drum and everything, and I was following your stuff for years, actually, years and years ago, and I knew that there was going to be pushback, but I was completely demoralized in my post at the time because the mining industry was delusional. They didn't seem to understand the problems they were faced with, and I had the distinct impression I was wasting my time. Now, this is when I was, I think, young and stupid, not really sort of understanding the implications of what you're about to do. I said, all right, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say it out loud, let the chips fall. If it means I have to get another job, so be it. Well, I didn't get another job. We had a king of the mountain defense, which means, like, is this data real or not? And I didn't understand the venom that was going to come my way. But once you're on stage, you've got no choice but to fight and keep going. And in the end, they said, all right, because I used their own data against them. In the end, they said, okay, look, we understand what you're saying, and we can't dispute what you're saying, but you will never say this again to a sponsor, or you will keep your mouth shut. If you ever publish this stuff, you will not use our name. Oh, geez. Okay. Oh, right. Okay. But my work was, I was bringing up some innovative stuff, so they had a reason to put up with, as they put it, my shit. So it would have. I've made a series of decisions across my career that have been career limiting. I could have been on the executive board of something like BHP by now if I'd actually played it smart. Right? And so I would be literally a millionaire right now, not a problem. But what I was doing and working in the mining industry, imagine, Steve, if you're actually in a position where you're working for a company and you knew what was happening was wrong, and people were making decisions based on what you're giving to them, and you knew they were getting it wrong, and there was going to come a point when they're going to hit a brick wall, and everyone's going to collectively go, oh, yeah, that was just a thing. Yeah, I had real trouble keeping a straight face. You guys are idiots. Now, you're rich idiots, you're powerful idiots, but you're still idiots. So what I would have done with 2020 hindsight is I would have been smarter about how I did this. I still would have actually said something or done something, but I would have done it in a way that was less destructive to my personal career. Because I was labeled as that crazy guy, the crazy guy they couldn't get rid of. It cut me out of many leadership roles because of I approached all this. No, he's too crazy. Mind you, those same people are now looking at my work very carefully.
Well, you see, that's a shame because I've followed your work. I've read a lot of the work you've done, and I've seen John Peach, and I think I question myself because I'm of a humble lifestyle. I'm not a wealthy man. The thing is, it's really kind of easy if you. It's not really very hard to become wealthy. There's certain things you have to do, but I've always been more motivated, kind of like the Albert Einstein approach. I get lost in the research, and so when I get up in the morning, I'm not trying to figure out, okay, what is the next contact I need to make? to move this project forward, or to get, and that's what people who want to be wealthy do. That is when they get up in the morning, that's their motivation, is to figure out how they're going to get their next the next entrepreneurial project, whatever. That wasn't my motivation. My motivation is to deconstruct what I'm seeing in a different way. You go into the details. You see, I was never an engineer. I was never in the mining industry. I was never in the oil industry. But I know who to listen to and who to ignore, and that's I guess the key. And so, what I tried to do is take this very complex world and make it simpler for people to understand. And so that's kind of, I think that was why I was brought on this earth. That's what clicks for me. And it's not something that is highly rewarded, as are many artists and et cetera. These people are not highly rewarded for their kind of craft or their kind of what they do. And so I do empathize with you and maybe other people that are in this peak oil chat, because it's not a matter of becoming wealthy, but it's a matter of understanding that it's the interest in me when I get up in the morning. I can't wait. This Bitcoin thing, I couldn't wait to get up in the last week and research it, because it blew me away to know that most people don't get what's happening. So that's my excitement. And I imagine that's the same thing for many of the people here. Yeah. That's the excitement in life, is like, wait a minute, this can't be happening. And so when I go on Twitter, which is one of the largest social media platforms, and I share this information, I get the same thing you get, Simon. You don't know what you're talking about. And one person says, how do you know that? They hide this stuff in SEC filings. It's right there. It's right there. You can't miss it. And so it's a very hilarious situation. That's the best way to describe it.
So what we are doing, like I explained this to my daughters once, that when we actually take on a career, what it is that we are actually trying to do here, and what motivates us? Is it money? Is it ethics? Is it, and I guess I saw a very serious spectrum of blind spots for society at large. And as a scientist and an engineer, I am geared in my DNA to A, look at the problem, understand it, and B, find a solution. And C, if that doesn't work, don't be in the way when things go horribly wrong. Right? And so everyone on this call feels that in some form, and they want to do something about it. And most of the time, such people, when I come across them, they do what they do in service of other people in some form, usually their children or grandchildren. Right? And so I'm in a window of opportunity at the moment where I'm having some success. While that is the case, I'm off like a freight train and no one's going to stop me. It may not last, but while that window is open, I'm going to use the maximum amount of effort. And in fact, if I may share my screen, I can show you Hawaii.
Sure.
Steve, have you had a laugh? You need a laugh, Steve, clearly. All right. So this is, there are 8 scenarios. This is the 5th scenario, which is the green transition. Are you actually able to see that?
I'm seeing power generation.
There we are.
There.
Okay. So this is a chart. On the left-hand side is what power was generated in Hawaii in 2020. I wanted 2019, but 2020 was actually it made more sense to actually use that year. Most of it's oil, some of it's coal. Renewable energy was actually sort of quite small. The column on the right is the extra power capacity they need to bring in to phase out fossil fuels.
So what's their current capacity?
So 9 terawatt hours, or 9,000 gigawatt hours is what they're producing at the moment, but they need to go to 62 gigawatt hours, 62,000. And the reason that is stuff that was traditionally done through oil, there's not just power generation, but it's also transport, now has to come off the power grid in some form.
Mm.
And so this is what the IEA reckons they're going to do in the next 26 years. Ho, ho, ho. But there is a battery charging station that's been set up in Hawaii that's 185 megawatts. It's it starts with a K. I can't quite remember, the Kaupoki or something.
Mhm.
Right. They made a big deal to actually put it in. You need 916,294 more of them.
Wow.
Ow! So, yeah. Anyway, so that's the green transition. And so here's the actual extra land that we need. Existing forestry area and farming is the middle one there. The extra land that's actually going to have to be pulled out for biofuels production, as what the IEA believes, and that's the area of the total state of Hawaii on the right-hand side. It's unlikely to go to plan. And so the list of infrastructure, this is the funny part, the punch. You know, every joke has a punchline, all right? Well, this will be a punch right between the eyes. This is the list of infrastructure needed to do the green transition in just Hawaii. Right. So
It's
yeah.
not. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, you know, there's no there. It's very sobering, and I do understand it. The people who are going to survive on Hawaii are going to survive on Hawaii because you can grow mostly you can grow fruits and vegetables mostly year round, depending on the elevation. The issue is the kind of lifestyle on Hawaii will drastically change, because it is impossible to do that. We're not going, and so unfortunately, Hawaii is one of the few states that it is the only state that has that kind of 90% almost of oil generation. And the problem is with that, the average electricity cost or price per kilowatt hour residential, I think in the United States, I think it's 16 cents per kilowatt. It's 15, 16 cents. Hawaii is almost it's four times that. It's 38, 40 cents. So these costs are just, it's unbelievable what people pay here. But I am not here. I am not here permanently. I'm here temporarily. Yeah. And so, but the thing is, I do understand it. Simon, you can't dispute these figures. And so now with that oil still moving around, everything seems to be fine. But I think I showed, there's an island of Delos that was it's kind of a major city, a major island in the Mediterranean. In the Mediterranean during the Late Bronze Age and then during the Roman Empire. You should see this island. I think I've got, let me see if I could show you the island of Delos. And I think this is unfortunately what is going to happen to a lot of these very populated islands. Okay, let me bring this up and then let me bring this up.
Andrew, we've got a couple of hands up.
Yeah, I was wondering. Leon's had his hand up for like an hour.
Do you know something? Sorry, was I talking without my microphone on?
No, that's fine. We missed a hand up.
Yeah, but I did want to ask Simon if you managed, because you've done a bunch of scenarios. I was wondering if you've tried doing a rural transition scenario.
So, my original work in the transition group, transition town group with Mount Tamborine, that was rural.
Oh, okay.
So that was actually a rural self-sufficiency based, how to take a small town self-sufficient. Since then, I've been mapping industrial stuff to show that this isn't going to work. Now, the rural transition zone is one of the things that will work under certain circumstances. Right, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. Like, you're not going to make computers, you're not going to make electric vehicles.
For most of the society.
Most of the time, but it will, society will be able to get back on its feet and can actually sort itself out. I haven't actually done a rural transition because if you were to do that in a heavily populated area like Hawaii, you'd have to. The closest I've come is the Club of Rome degrowth, where I shrunk Hawaii to 31% of its existing size.
Yeah.
Right, and that's the closest I've actually come. If you go to a true rural outcome, where and if you would actually do it in a genuinely long-term, sustainable, stable context, you would have to reduce the population substantially again.
Well, my understanding that would be for Honolulu, because it's Honolulu specifically is massively overpopulated, but like that island Oahu. But if you were to distribute all of the Hawaiians along all of the islands and then give
especially
each of
the
them,
Big Island.
yeah, give each of them a half a hectare, then you should have enough land.
It depends how you do it. Like I'm trying to do things without petrochemical fertilizers, for example,
Right.
and go full organic. And the simple answer is no. I haven't actually done the numbers for that, because every time I've started that, people have frozen like deer in headlights, because that's a little scary. Shouldn't we look at your batteries?
Yeah. Well, it's just because there's that example of the Tecopia, right?
Yeah.
Tecopia, they've been doing it for 1,000 years, and it's been working for them just fine. Yeah.
And so, we'd have to radically change. So why don't we do these hands, and then Steve was going to talk.
Leon, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead. What was your question?
Sorry, mate.
I just wanted to say a few things. Steve mentioned about the Chinese transition with electric buses and etc. And I can confirm that. I live here and see it. But they're also popping up some hydrogen buses now. So there's one that just comes up round the corner here every day. It passes me when I'm on my electric scooter. So I think the green transition thing is dying a quick death really in people's households these days, and a lot of friends and family have lost faith in that idea already, and I think that's the underlying fact that's happening. And Simon's work, I think, has actually silently crept into a lot of places, and
I've pissed off a lot of people.
Yeah, I really do think your work. No one's going to talk about it, Simon, right? Openly, and I think that it has crept in to probably more households than we actually realise. And then I was thinking about like degenerative ways of living, and that's literally how we're living, right? In a degenerative way. So how can we live in a regenerative way? And that's what I'm studying at the moment. But my question was regards to diesel, and where's diesel coming from? What type of oil is it coming from, and where is it coming from, and which countries in particular is it coming from?
John Peach would probably be the best to answer that.
Sorry, I had to get the puppy up. What was the question?
Leon,
where does diesel come from? Which countries? Which oil is it being refined from, and which countries have the reserves of that oil?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think it's the middle distillates, right? That you get the crude oil in, and then there's the heavy part that goes into like bunker fuels. The middle part is diesel, and the upper part is gasoline and other products. My guess is that there's less and less coming out of shale oil because it's just not heavy. But I don't have good data on that. I don't know how badly the shale is, or what fraction of shale is going into diesel.
All right. Did anyone else want to chip in on that, or should Steve continue with his
Well,
presentation?
The
Well,
United
I'd
States-
like to ask that question about where does the US get all its diesel from in that case, if it's not coming out of their production? You should probably know that.
Well, yeah, I think we're still producing it, but it's just I think the fraction of diesel is coming from shale is dropping. So it's not like there's nothing there. It's just a smaller fraction.
Most of the oil that comes from Venezuela is quite heavy and sulfury. I think that's what winds up in U.S. refineries.
Yeah, and the Canadian
Yeah.
tar sand.
And they
Yeah.
mix it in with the lighter shales to make the diesel that you can put in your car.
Hmm.
Well, I know the back end was really, really light, and it was so light that it was actually explosive. And so that was the stuff that would like blow up. I mean, that was crude oil that was actually explosive. So that's why, they weren't getting anything out of that super light stuff, out of the shale oil.
I
So
just
now,
peeked at the
now diesel. Sorry, Steve.
no, Leon,
so
I
now-
just peeked at the. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Leon. I apologize.
I just wanted to get it straight in my head. Diesel is a mixture of a tight oil and crude, or what is diesel? What oil does it come from, and which countries
Typically,
hold that?
historically, diesel has come from conventional because that's what we produced mostly first. So when you refine a typical barrel of crude oil, a medium grade oil, you're going to get so much gasoline. Then the second thing is diesel, and then you get jet fuels, and you get asphalt in there to make roads. And there's other different components of petroleum products that come out of that. The United States is the largest diesel producer in the world. It's about 4.5 million barrels a day. It's followed by, get this, China, and then I think it's India and Russia. Those are the top four. The United States still imports 6 to 7 million barrels a day of medium, different ranges, but some heavy, but medium oil. We get a lot from Canada. What's happening is, and I learned some of this from Mark Berman and some other people from the EIA. We're mixing the light tight oil with the heavier oil sands, and it produces kind of a Frankenblend that is a medium grade when you have a 40 or 50 API oil, and then you mix it with a lower 20 or oil sands, and you get a more of a medium grade. The problem is the impurities, and the problem to refine that is much more problematic, and there's much more impurities that have to come out. So they can do it, but I think as tight oil production starts to decline, it's going to get more problematic. So again, most of the diesel that's produced in the world is produced from conventional oils. We're not getting it from NGLs. We're not getting it from just tight oil. But the thing is, they can change the refineries a bit, and you can get more diesel, but it's very costly. So it's really not economic to produce more diesel out of a lower quality petroleum like NGLs. It can be done, but it's very costly, so it's not really economic. So the easiest thing to do is to produce the diesel out of the 60-something million barrels a day of conventional oil. That's where most of the diesel comes from.
Steve, and yet you say that the US is producing more diesel than any other country, but nearly most of the oil production of the US is from shale.
Yeah, well, that's right, because we import that 7 million barrels a day. See, we export 3 to 4 million barrels a day of tight oil because we can't use it. So it goes throughout the world for different uses. A lot of it goes to Europe. And then we import 6 to 7 million barrels a day of medium grade, actually heavier oil, which a lot of it, I'd say half of that comes from Canada because it's our northern border. And so that's how we're producing the 4.5. And get this, we're exporting about 1 million barrels a day of that diesel just to keep everybody else happy. So when you look at the U.S. diesel inventories, which continue to be at the minimum 5-year level, it wouldn't have to be there if we didn't export 1 million barrels a day of that diesel. But unfortunately, a lot of other countries need that diesel. So basically, we're trying to fill all the holes in the dike that are popping up. And so it's also economic. It's better to sell diesel abroad to get a better price than to fill the inventories here.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. So I mean, you know, exporting diesel is going to help the US market stay kind of still, I was going to say buoyant, but feels like that's a bit of a, it's not really very buoyant, is it? Under the underlying case of what's going on.
And I had that wonderful chart that, because you know the biggest problem is people say there's no peak oil, because if you're colorblind and you look at the silhouette of the total petroleum production, it doesn't look like there's any peak oil. But that's the wrong chart. The chart is the one that shows conventional peaked in 2006.
Yeah.
And even though it came back up, I think came back up after the 2020 pandemic shutdown, and then production came back up, the conventional is even lower than everything else. And so I think, as Simon probably knows this, that's going to really start to really kick in, even if we make up with more NGLs. And the shale industry will do that. We will produce more NGLs, whether we need to or not.
Yeah, but it's I mean, all the time they're still sucking on the conventional oil, right? So
that's the high quality oil.
Yeah, it's almost like
something that gets hidden is that there's the net energy, right? Rather than what's shown is the total production, but a lot of that is going back into producing, right? So we're not seeing the net oil produced. It's the gross is the numbers that they get announced.
Yeah, so it's kind of a hidden. So it's a hidden. It's like this kind of hidden thing that's just going to pop open at some stage, right? Because you've got all the tight shale that's masking this continued conventional oil diminishing oil, and then when that starts declining, all of a sudden you're gonna see the true figures come out, aren't you? So, it's gonna pop out like an alien in a Sigourney Weaver film, right?
Yeah, and I'm trying to get I've got them. This is a pretty good chart. It's only to 2021, but let me see if I can bring this up in the group. How do I share?
So the bottom, if you move your mouse, there's the microphone, the video, and then the little arrow thing. You click on that starts share screening.
Third one along.
Does it work? And then
I don't have an. I've got the different the three circles that is like the settings, and it says share video, but I don't see.
No, not there. Another part of the bar. Not the three dots.
Oh, start sharing screen. Got it.
Start screen sharing. Yeah.
Okay. And entire screen. Here we go. Oh, first I wanted to. This is the island of Delos, in the Mediterranean, and where is all the other? Oh, here we go. This is what it
we're not
looked
seeing...
like during. Oh, you're not seeing it now?
No, you managed to do it last time when you did the presentation.
Oh, here we go.
It's the same.
All right.
There we go. Now we can see something.
Okay.
There.
This is this is the beautiful island of Delos, which is kind of, you might say, what Hawaii is in many areas. When you drive around Hawaii, there's a lot of going up some of these kind of mountainous areas or these hilly areas. Homes are everywhere. So this is the island of Delos in the Mediterranean, and this is what it looked like, artist rendering during the about, I think it was during the ancient Roman Empire. And so basically the entire island, just like Hawaii, was only possible by massive wood imports, because there was no wood really left on the island, and massive food imports. So that's what it became, like the wealthy place to be. This was, and so it's kind of very similar to what Simon was talking about with Hawaii. Now, this is the chart that I think people don't really get. I posted it last time I was on the P chat, but you could see that yellow NGLs. That's what's kind of confusing the market, because that's what the EIA and the IEA show as total supply. So we got the tight oil in red, you've got the heavy oil in that brown, and then you've got the NGLs in that yellow. And so if I had 2023 when they come out with the data, it's probably surpassed the 2019. But the problem is the olive color. That's where the diesel comes from.
Yeah.
The olive color mostly, and that's going to continue to head lower. So I just wanted to share that.
And I did ask ChatGPT about the ratios, and it was saying 20 to 35% for conventional, closer to 20% for shale, and then nothing from NGLs. And then tar sands, it said, like, in theory you could get 30 to 50%, but it requires a large amount of refining. Like Steve was saying, it's not very economical.
No, and I think this will become more apparent with the problem with trying to keep producing diesel, because the global supply chain isn't fueled on gasoline. You know, there isn't any massive container ship coming from China fueled by gasoline. And so I think this is going to be, that's when you're going to start seeing global trade contract due to the diesel starting to contract. And it won't be readily apparent. It's not going to be readily apparent. And they may try to, transition some trucks to natural. They did that with UPS. They try to do either liquid natural gas, and now they're going to try that, but it's just not economic to do that. And we need the natural gas now for generating electricity in the United States. So, yeah, I think the diesel is going to be the real big problematic petroleum.
So, in fact, when I'm doing my thing where I'm sort of looking at, if we were to phase out fossil fuel systems and find a replacement, trucks, big heavy trucks, are taking 80% of the energy on the other side of the equation. So much so, then my solution set is, if we've got to reinvent what society does with trucks. Trucks run on diesel. Right, and so and so at a fundamental level, at our very DNA, how our society is laid out, we are dependent not just on petroleum, but diesel. And I think this is going to leave a mark when it comes out.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is the industrial agriculture. The tractors run on diesel too.
They do.
Yeah.
And the problem is too, when we were a younger country, we started out with railroads, right? That's how we tamed the West. We got rid of unfortunately, we got rid of a lot of the Native Americans. And so we got rid of the Native Americans to make way for the trains. And then the trains were run on diesel. And that was diesels, as you know, it's much more efficient than trucks. But we just got that just in time. So we went to that just in time system. And so now a lot of the food and a lot of the goods is no longer held really at stores. It's basically an ongoing trucking. So a lot of the storage in the United States and the world is held in this trucking system, even though it's at distribution areas. That's where a lot of the inventory is now. It's held in these trucks, where before the rail would move a lot of the product to a station, and then it would go to a store. And in the back of these old grocery stores, there was a lot of product there, but it became uneconomic to hold all that product. You have to finance all that product. So they made the product smaller, the storage in the back of the store. They just moved it to the trucks. And that's where it's at now, moving around constantly.
Yeah, just in time delivery.
Right. Well, that's a good chart.
Yep. Yeah, so we had a YouTube question.
Yeah.
Ask Stephen Simon about Nate Hagen's recent charge to 2050 with only 7% less oil production in 2050. So I don't know if you and John and Simon Steve have a comment on this particular chart.
So, Nate, this is with the chart you've got on the screen now is from Art Berman, and he's got a parallel one with it that actually shows, total fuels actually has exceeded our 2018 peak, but crude and condensate is now in decline. So we have actually seen peak oil, but what we call peak oil has to evolve, and we've actually got to unpack that more. So this, what you've actually got at the moment is what I think is the most sophisticated set of charts. And in fact, Steve, you and John and Art Berman, that trio of analysts, I really think that's where it's at in the most sophisticated data sets that is coming out. Nate Hagens does excellent work. His great simplification is good. It doesn't cover everything. It's within a relatively narrow bandwidth. A lot of the assumptions going to 2030, I think I see the world a little differently. I think there's going to be a lot of demand destruction in an unplanned way, and I don't see humanity getting its act together to try and fix it. So who knows what the real answer is going to be? But it's going to be this era historically. Future historians will look back on this era is play silly games, win stupid prizes, and that's going to come out in the data.
I had a question. Can you, both of you guys who know, can you turn jet fuel into some sort of a diesel? Because it feels like we're using all this jet fuel. I mean, it's like the ultimate shopping fuel. You're just flying around on it, where maybe it could be turned into something that you could use for agriculture, forestry, and things that we actually need, and transportation.
That's a good question, and I think the issue is we know where we're at, and I always call it plus or minus. I call it circa. I call it the energy cliff because I think it's the energy cliff with conventional. The conventional is going to look cliff-like, but we could add a lot of the other unconventional, and so the thing is, where do we go after this 2025 period? And Simon brought up there could be demand destruction. I think we're going to hit a recession that the market isn't prepared for.
Yeah.
Because China has built metropolises and cities to nowhere and to everywhere, and some of them they don't need. And so what they've done is they've got all this debt and finance propping up a system that they really can't run. And so I think what's going to happen, a lot of the demand that they pulled from oil, most of the growth of oil consumption, a lot of it came from China. So I think they're going to have difficulty maintaining that system. So you may see demand start to decline from China. India will probably take up some of that demand because they haven't made the same mistakes that China did. They're starting to, but they're in the initial stage. So they can put a mother and father and 3 kids on a moped and have 2 or 3 chickens, and they get much more efficient use out of that petroleum than China does. But China does that in many areas too. So, and we're the worst. We have the mother and the kid going to soccer in a suburban. So so there's a lot of room for efficiency. So I think the issue is my first reaction, we're going to hit this energy cliff and it's going to be very disruptive. My second thinking now is what central banks are going to do to kind of prop up the system. We're going to have this demand destruction happening at the same time production is going to be in a plateau. So I think we could be in a plateau longer than I originally thought. But it's not like for decades. It may be 5 years, it may be 8 years, but after that, things really start. And I think that chart that you showed was where that Art put together, that's a possibility. Is it a high probability? I don't know. But I think it's got more of a probability of happening than more of a drastic decline in global oil, total petroleum production. And so how this world kind of manages through all that, I think it could look for the next 5 years or so, it could look like the top of that. But I think after that, I think it's going to be more cliff-like.
Yeah.
And that's due to the implosion of the financial system and other things. It's going to start to decline at a much greater level. That's just my 2 cents. That's what my gut reaction of this data is telling me.
Could I share
Go ahead.
something here that can you?
Sure. Just I
See,
want.
This is the production history, and the point I want to make here is that it just continues to go up. It's actually curling upwards here, whereas Art's chart makes a curling downward, right? And so I think that what we're going to see is that the expectation has always been everything's going to go up, right? And so even though it doesn't look like it's a big decline in Art's data, the difference is what's going to count.
Mm.
Yeah.
And John, you put out some great numbers in these reserves, and I imagine you all know who John La Herrera is, and I correspond with him. And so I guess the issue is, what is the real numbers? And then there was a petroleum reservoir engineer wrote a book about the coming shock or the coming cut improved oil reserves. So, you bring up excellent points. This is the amazing thing too that is underappreciated. That I have to, if I have an open mind, I have to consider it. One of the problems if you are a precious metal investor, which I tend to be due to the innate abilities of precious metals to store the liquidity of energy. That's basically what it is. It stores the collateral of the energy market. Nothing else really does that as well as gold and silver. The problem going forward now is, gosh, I lost my train of thought. The problem going forward is the price of silver is $25. 20 years ago, it was $5. It's 5 times that. But a lot of precious metal investors are frustrated because everything else is going up because of all the printing by the central banks. The thing is, if we think it's frustrating to invest in silver to protect your wealth in inflation, the natural gas price in the United States is the same it is today as it was 25 years ago. It's $1.70, MMBTU. That was because of shale gas. And I'm not saying it was economic to do that, but shale gas is a much better thing to do than shale oil due to the physics of taking, and Simon knows this, of releasing the gas out of the shale. Yes. It works much better. And so the thing is, I think one of the things we're not considering is this ability to continue this kind of unconventional, to just keep the system going. That's all I'm saying. I do not disagree conventional gets into trouble. I do not disagree that a lot of this oil that we think is out there is not out there. I do agree with all that. But I thought after 2025, we would probably see more cliff-like declines, but I'm extending that due to this ability of our human system to push and continue the situation a little bit more and a little bit more. That may not happen, but I think because look at what happened with the oil drum. It was showing what was going on, and then we had 15 years, and now people think the peak oil drum, people were just, no, it's just the system allowed to kick the can down the road a little bit longer. All I'm saying is this process could kind of happen for another 5 or 8 years.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, before things really start to get ugly.
So what will break is our ability to keep that going.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So the red queen will catch us before it catches oil.
Yeah, before
And this has all been driven by that finance now. If
Yes.
you see, people say the central banks are the problem. They do it, but no, the central banks are trying to keep this system alive. That's one of the issues that I disagree with a lot of people who look at the central banks as basically the ills of the world. No, they're trying to provide this finance to continue pulling out this unconventional energy to kick the can down the road, but they make a bigger and bigger problem. I get that. And so I think the next stage, and I'll shut up here, is the treasury market's going to get into trouble. Not only in the US, which is the foundation of the global economy. If you and I want to go to a bank and borrow, you have to have collateral. And most people have to use home equity or business equity. You can't go into a bank and say, I want to borrow $1 million, and they ask you for your equity or your collateral and you give them $500,000 in debt. You can't do that unless that debt is a U.S. Treasury. You can borrow off of a U.S. Treasury debt. It's insane, but that's the way the market behaves. Soon, in the next several years, I think the Treasury market's going to become unsustainable due to how much it's issuing. And this is going to happen in other Treasury and bond markets. That's why the central banks are trying to move to the digital currency. So the Federal Reserve now, and I don't mean to bore people, instead of issuing a treasury to cover our deficits, not only in the United States but elsewhere, you've got to make that treasury, you've got to sell that treasury, you've got to service that treasury. The Federal Reserve is going to take over that responsibility by having 2 ledgers. It will issue the money, and you won't have to issue a treasury. There won't be any more debt. There won't be any servicing, because that market's going to get into trouble. So this is the next stage of finance. If we look logically, this is what the central banks are going to do to kick the can down the road, is to use direct monetization that isn't a debt and that isn't a service cost on that debt. And that will probably happen. And that is going to kind of continue this thing. And so I just want the people listening to this to understand, I think that is a very viable option to allow this system to go a few more years. How many years? It's not going to be many, but that's the last step of the system.
So just had a question from YouTube. They were wondering about the shale and other such difficult to get things, I just wanted to explain about that, that there's kind of different grades of oil, and the ones that are easy to get, we got them a while ago, and now we're getting into the harder and harder stuff. And so while there may be a huge amount of theoretical kerogen or shale, most of it is what's called immature. So it is in a state where it's just a shale rock. Now the stuff in the Permian, it has been underground for a long time under high pressure and heat, and that high pressure and heat has melted out the oil kind of out of it, and so there's kind of like, they're like slippery rocks, you could say. And so it's getting, when they frack it, that like the slipperiness or whatever, the crude, and some of it is a conventional crude, comes out, and they manage to get it. But like that, the Permian is kind of the best last shale field that we have, and all the other shale fields we know of are lower quality, so it's going to be harder to get the shale out. And like some of it, like Green River, even though it's considered part of this 2 PCS, so it's considered part of our speculative reserves. However, you have to, in order to get anything out of it, you have to put it under high heat and pressure for a long period of time in order to get it to drip out some drops of oil. So you're not actually getting any energy out of it. And that's my understanding. And that's why, even though we have, like, say, if you were to run the numbers and 1624 divided by 30, you'd get 54 years of oil left. But a lot of that oil is just, we're never going to get it. Not in this, time around of civilization.
No, I agree. I totally agree with that. These numbers that Rystad and these other consultancies put out are numbers to really to continue the system without calling fire in the theater. That's really what those numbers are. Because I do think I looked at the study of the German World War II effort, and there were some German generals, there were some German ministers that really knew the energy situation with Germany. And they had to win against Russia in a certain period of time, or their petrol was going to run out, which is why they moved down to go into the Caucasus, and which is the reason why the United States and allies won, because we had all the oil. 70% of the oil came from the United States. So it's always been about the oil. So I do think there are people, even though we've got a lot of corrupt and there's a lot of grift happening, a lot of stupid, unwise people, I do think there are a few members in the Pentagon. I think there are a few members in the different governments that kind of understand this. They do understand this, because these numbers don't lie. And so I think a lot of the geopolitical events we're seeing is due to these energy problems that we're facing. And I mean, look at the Canadian oil sands. That thing, even though it's so destructive, to me, Canadian oil sands operation is environmentally destructive. It's a very low energy return on investment, but they're able to do that because in Alberta, they've got the shale gas right there. And they need that shale gas to process that oil. And I've got charts, and many of you, maybe you've seen that. Every million barrels a day of oil sands production out of Alberta, it takes about 1 billion cubic feet a day of gas. And that's a pretty damn good correspondent. And so they still have enough shale gas there for quite a while, and they're going to continue pumping out the oil sands because they have the shale gas there to process that oil. So these are these crazy dynamics that just continue. I don't think they ever should have tapped into those oil sands, but I can't control the market. All I can do is read what was happening and kind of give an idea of what's going to happen in the future.
And it's important to note that the so EROI is not just low; it's 2.5, right, for tar sands. And in order to truck the fuel, you need 3. And that's why they keep trying to make those pipelines for the tar sands, because it just doesn't have enough energy to make it worthwhile to truck it. But the thing is that when you make the pipelines for them, they have to be heated pipelines, because tar is solid at room temperature, and they often catch on fire. And that's why you have like all these. When they were trying to build the Exxon XL or whatever through America, it kept blowing up. It kept lighting on fire. And so even if we manage to get this oil, most of it will probably just stay in the ground, because it's not enough to keep our, to pay the truckers, drivers, and farmers. And we know the EU is going, like their farmers are going bankrupt. And so that indicates that with all these sanctions and stuff, their overall EROI seems to have dropped close to 7. I did another analysis, and the average OECD farmer works 60 hours a day. Sorry, not a day, sorry, a week. 60 hours a week, whereas an average regular person that's an employee only works 35, like a politician or something like that. And so they're working twice as much as a regular person, and they're not making enough to live. So that makes sense why they're protesting and, throwing poop at the Brussels Parliament and all that stuff. And in terms of, you brought up a good point about that energy thing, and this is what I've been saying online for several weeks, is basically that Russia has these 43 billion barrels proven reserves, and what does the EU have? There's Norway. Norway has 4, and then United Kingdom has 1, so that's 5 in Europe. And then how much do they actually use per year? They use 5 billion barrels of oil per year, and so they don't have enough energy to actually run this war. And I believe that's why Ukraine was going after those refineries. And then to bring it back to that point Ivor was talking about, with how they had sent in, was it 400,000 people into Russia with Napoleon, and only 4,000 came back. And so, France is trying to do it again. They want to send 2,000. Well, this says 20,000, but some say 2,000. Based on the Ukraine statistics, they lose about 1,000 a day there. So it would be good enough for 2 days there.
Well,
I know the numbers. Simon and John and you all look at these numbers. The numbers don't lie. They just don't. I mean, it is amazing how you just look at the numbers. They tell you the truth. So it's fascinating to watch kabuki theater right in front of you, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, all I try to do with my website and my work is I try to wake up a few people. I'm not saying precious metals is the only thing, is the most important thing to do. But in the future, if financial assets are going to get into trouble, then, logic suggests that the metals are going to reemerge. I don't know if that's the case or not, but so I try to wake up a few people, try to get people to, understand that their financial assets are going to get into serious trouble, and also to start transitioning to a more simpler lifestyle. And so I know, Simon, you've got some good ideas. And if you look at civilization in the past, I have to think there were some pretty smart and wise individuals that were up there trying to maybe offer some advice how this civilization could kind of maybe transition to something better. But you dig up all these civilizations, and they didn't make it.
No,
they just didn't make it. They you know what happened? What's his name? Lastly, the collapse of complex societies.
Joseph Tainter.
That's right. That's the MO. How we get there, we're going to become more simple. How we get there, that's the question.
So, take that further. If you were to write that further, okay, we're going to collapse. Okay, so now the MO is build the next civilization.
Yes, and we'll have to get that next time because our 2 hours are up. But
oh my God, I'm so sorry. I hope I didn't talk too much.
It's okay.
Not enough. You didn't talk enough. I love this stuff. You've been a great kid.
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to when you come out with that. How long is it going to be before that gets released?
So it's got to be the final draft's got to be finished. The Hawaiian government is going to review it, the governor's office and the mayor's office. This is going through a group called Sustainable Hawaii. It's got to be reviewed. Once it's reviewed, it can then be signed off as an open file report and come out. It depends how long the review process takes. It's going to be about 500 pages. And it's the most fundamental smackdown of the existing system I've written thus far, whereas all other work's been too polite. So we'll see how much is actually allowed to make it through the review.
I'm looking forward to see this. I'm looking forward to see the process, not only the paper but the process.
So I do actually. I've documented quite a few things. The idea is to have everyone in Hawaii, and there's lots of tribes. Wave power is going to do it. Solar power is going to do it. The idea is to put the numbers on the ground for each tribe without saying who's right, and said, right, if we're going to go your route, this is what's got to look like. Right? If everything's an electric vehicle, that's what it is. If everything's a hydrogen fuel cell, that's what it's going to look like. If everything's going to be an ammonia fuel vehicle, that's what it's going to look like. If it's going to be 100% geothermal, this is how many plants you need to build. The data's on the table for everyone. Now, I'm going to express an opinion in the end about what you might be able to do, but before we get to that, everyone's going to have enough data so they can actually have a frank discussion, which is why it's 500 pages.
Do you have someone there that is a magnet to help get this information to them? Or how did you? Oh, good.
So let me show you the.
I'm sorry, Andrew, if you don't mind, I want to just hear this before we.
No. So in fact, I'll take it further. Would you like to be one of my reviewers?
Absolutely.
Because all right. So Andrew, give Steve my contact details. I'm sharing the screen now.
Okay.
So this is actually Sustainable Energy Hawaii, and Peter Sternlicht is the chap who is helping me with this. The idea is to actually sort of find Hawaiians and get Hawaiians to lead this. Right. And to get an understanding of what we're looking at here, when I release a report, a data set comes with it. So this is the data set that's been put together. So there's about 200 tables, right? Come on, where are you? So the idea is each table is labeled in the report. Then you've got the appendices that come with that, and industry.
You are an encyclopedia of data. You see, I sometimes go, why I was able to put all together. Simon, I don't hold a candlestick to you because this is like an encyclopedia of data. I could never do this. So I just want to let you know, this is impressive.
Thank you. It's the idea is to have everyone in place for power station performance, geothermal, wave, biofuel, and so on. But we've actually run out of letters, and we're actually up to A to Z for appendices, and now we're alpha, beta, and gamma. And so,
well, I sure hope you have some engineers that are going to look at this.
So I do have some engineers to actually sort of go through this. I'm using commercially available stats. The way I get around the energy return and energy invested problem is instead of actually just making top-down calculations, what did each of these stations on average deliver in the year 2018? Like what was the average performance of a solar power station? What was the average performance of a nuclear power station? Not what they promised, but what do they do? And I said, right, to replace a coal-fired power station, it did this on average. You need this number of solar panels to replace that. Sucks to be you, here are the numbers. And so far, no one's been able to knock me off my perch.
And by the way, when I said engineers look at this, I wasn't questioning your data. I want to know if on the Hawaii side, they're going to have the engineers to look at this data.
Apparently so.
Okay.
Apparently so. Let me get down to the table of contents. Oh yeah, I put things in my reports to make sure that people actually read it. Right, like, you know, that has to be taken out. And when we get down to, for example, I love putting quotes in the beginning of things too, like Julius Caesar. It was not in the stars to hold our destiny, but ourselves. And so when we get down to like the end here, in the appendices, a list of good whiskey, geothermal kung fu, and the Easter Island case study. All of that will be edited out, but it's to make sure my people actually read it. So
it's like a little test.
Well, it's just that bastard puts things in this report that shouldn't be there. We better check his work. Yeah. Anyway, so these are the sort of places to actually sort of go. The governor's office and the mayor's office are going to go through this. There's going to be people who are all the opposing forces on Hawaii that want to argue with each other what they should and shouldn't do. They're all going to be asked to review it. Now, then And then I'm coming to Hawaii with my wife for the formal launch of the actual report, and we're going to have whenever there is later this year sometime. We don't know yet, but we'll let you know when I'd like to meet you in person. I'd like to shake your hand and thank you for your work. But when we and then we were actually going to have a discussion slash bar fight, because and what we are hoping is we can actually start having a real discussion.
Yes.
Yeah. And so there's your HA, everything's electric. HB, everything's hydrogen. HC, all systems are biofuel and biomass. Ho, ho, ho. HD, everything is ammonia.
Oh. It's we're not seeing what if you're presenting something on the screen.
Oh man, really?
Yeah.
We were,
well,
and then
we
stopped,
were,
Simon.
and then you just recently.
My
there. Okay.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this to get everyone in the mood, Julie, Shakespeare. So this is the table of contents. Okay, so HA is everything electrical. HB is everything is the hydrogen economy. HC is everything's biofuels and biomass. HD is everything is ammonia. HE is the green transition, the way the IEA posts it. HF, where are we? HF is hybrid degrowth, as in let's now apply the Club of Rome degrowth, and I use food production to do it. Double food production, and then we have to cut everything back to 31%. HG, circular economy, if we're actually to do that. And HH, which is the last one that's being written now, is the purple transition, where I'm going to propose, the gloves come off and I'm going to propose a series of unorthodox technologies. If everything else is going to fail, turn to the unorthodox or accept failure. So it's,
What about
I like that, the geothermal kung fu. There you go.
What about HR with the rural transition?
So that's actually, I've actually suggested that before, and they said, okay, we'll let you do it because it's come up so many times. Whether I've actually got space to do it in this report, because at the moment we're sitting at 500 pages. Oh. It may have to actually be a separate piece of work. And is Hawaii the best place to make that case? And the answer is probably not, because it's an isolated system. Whereas the rural transit, I had the idea of develop a self-sufficient society around a small town, a network of small towns, and each small town is a decentralized node that when they trade amongst themselves. That is a viable way forward.
Kind of where we came from.
Yeah.
Hey, that's catchy.
Kind of where we came from.
Write that down.
And it's actually a better lifestyle too.
So and so I'm actually advocating a series of proposed solutions in parallel. So instead of saying one's better than the other, I've got about 7 or 8 of them running in parallel, and each one serves a purpose. Okay. And some of those purposes are not necessarily that long-lived. Once the purpose is served, okay, thank you very much, shut that down, concentrate on something else.
Good idea. I'm looking forward to it. I'm definitely looking forward to checking it out. Yeah, I think this is great because Hawaii is kind of a perfect example. They're going to have to do something quicker than others.
So it's and
did we want to schedule the next one in 2 weeks to kind of continue this discussion?
Up for that.
Okay. Let me see. Yeah. I am gone the 26th to the 2nd, I believe. So it would maybe the better for now. You could do it, but I won't be able to be. I will be out of town. But maybe anytime after the 2nd or 3rd, or let's say the 3rd of April.
How about,
I could be a part of it.
How about the 9th? Or
perfect.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll finalize it afterwards. Yeah.
Okay.
9th of April works for me.
Well, thanks you guys for letting me join, and maybe I can look at I can put together some updates, because that's what I like to look at, is to check updates, how the inventories are changing, and I mean, look, whoever thought natural gas would go up and hit, almost a new high and then come all the way down to, and it could get ugly. The natural gas market could get even uglier in the next couple of months before it starts heading back up.
All right.
Great.
Final remarks before I do the outro?
Thank you guys so much. It's fascinating.
Thank you.
I'm telling you, it is a deep dive into the reality. It's really interesting.
All right. So
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks very much.
You've been very patient.
Until
Liam.
next time.
Till next time.
Next time, yeah. We're looking forward to it.
all right. So as
Thanks, everybody.
As we found we leave you in the love and light of the one infinite creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one infinite creator. Adonai. All right.
Thank you.
All right, I ended the stream.
Bye.
Okay, bye.